Hello again. I picked up this excellent book in a charity shop today. It is called The 70 Great Inventions of the Ancient World, and it's a thoroughly comprehensive account of all the inventions you can think of in the ancient world and advances in technology and so on, beginning with stone tools and leading up as far as writing and the smelting of metals. Looking through this book, one thing immediately strikes me. Once we get past stone tools and fire, that is to say, things that happened a million or so years ago, we start seeing things like baskets, glass, textiles, furniture, wheels and bridges, you know, the sort of things that people were building in ancient Mesopotamia and Europe. We find that all these things had their origin in Europe and Asia. I include Egypt in the category of Europe because it was always part of the Middle Eastern culture, which we know as a Fertile Crescent, and DNA analysis shows that the ancient Egyptians had far more in common with the Middle East than they did with Africa. There's no trace of black DNA in those studies. Literally, nothing appears to have its origins in sub-Saharan Africa. Literally nothing once you've got beyond stone tools and fire. Not even the making of fire seems to be something that started in Africa. They kept it going, collected fire from lightning strikes and so on, but actually kindling fire didn't seem to be much of a thing with the Africans. It is true that those living there did come up with some ideas like casting in bronze, but this was thousands and thousands, 5,000 or 6,000 years after it had been developed and then abandoned in Europe. The first casting of bronze were things in Benin, which were about 1000 AD, whereas in India and Israel, bronze things, you know, the Cera Purdue lost wax method, were being undertaken 5,000-6,000 BC. It is fair to say that in the last 30,000 years or so, nothing has been invented in sub-Saharan Africa which was not already known in Europe and Asia. When you think about it, this is a rather curious state of affairs. Did it really never occur to any black Africans to build something higher than a bungalow or to develop a system of writing? It did not. The only places where we see proper building in stone in Africa, as opposed to the dry stone walls of Zimbabwe, which were not, of course, buildings to live in, was in Ethiopia. And this was an idea which had been imported from the Arabian Peninsula, like their language and writing system. No black African ever thought of writing, and all the societies were illiterate until Muslims arrived from North Africa and taught them to become literate. The same thing, of course, applies to Australia. There was no writing there, nor any building, stone buildings. Elsewhere, writing arose spontaneously in China, Mesopotamia, South America and Egypt, from where it spread to other places. Africa seemed to stagnate until the coming of Arabs and Europeans, who introduced everything which those living below the Sahara seemed incapable of coming up with for themselves. There is something very strange about this. In South America, civilizations sprung up which built monumental architecture and invented their own writing systems. This happened too in China and the Middle East. It did not happen in Australia or Africa. Is it coincidental that these two continents were inhabited by black people? If so, was there a connection between their ethnicity and lack of progress? This is really a mystery. Once the ideas were given to Africa, they succeeded in adapting many of the inventions from Europe, but despite this, there is no sign of further progress, either in the field of mathematics, technology, or science, or medicine, or anything much. New ideas are constantly emerging from Europe and North America, but practically never from African countries which lay on or below the equator. It appears that those living there are able to copy what they have been shown, and even to maintain a vague semblance of Western civilization, but there is no sign of progress in the sense of independent work in any scientific field. I'm not drawing any conclusions from this, but rather feel inclined to ask why it should be. Is there something particularly about the geography of Africa which holds back progress? I can't think that this is the case. After all, Central America is hot and steamy as well as West Africa, but this didn't prevent the emergence of various civilizations in that part of the world, and also the invention of writing. There seems to be something special about Africa and Australia which works against innovation and progress. There's certainly an association between high levels of melanin in the skin and this lack of progress, but this doesn't mean that there is a direct link. As we all know, correlation is not at all the same thing as causation. I'm also intrigued to see that in Australia now the same games are being played with history as we are seeing in Europe and America. By this I mean that white Australians are pretending that the indigenous inhabitants of the continent were actually an advanced civilization. This fantasy is now being taught in schools, and it's even being suggested that Aboriginal culture was in some ways more advanced than that of the Europeans who colonised Australia. I find it curious that this revisionist view of history should be operating in Australia as it is in Europe. Whether this is something which the Australians are copying because they too wish to show they feel guilty for the sins of their forefathers, I couldn't say.